All right, here we are, looking at Crime and Punishment Part 3 today with PatMan and Will. What did you guys think?
Uh, I think I found this part a bit more enjoyable than the first two parts, with the way Razumihin's character came into play, being this saintly friend to Rhodia and his family, and doing his very best to console them. The interactions were a bit lighter, I think, is a good way to describe this part,
Mm-hmm. Much
at
less
least for the
death.
first half.
Yeah, I think we just skimmed over it a bit in our last video, but we see this Marmeladov character getting run over by a horse cart, and then you see all the development of the character of Marmeladov's daughter, which you get to see a lot more of in this section.
Yeah,
Sophia or Sonia, however you pronounce it.
I think it's Sonia, but honestly, the jury's out on that one.
I think it's
Which,
both.
yeah, it very well could be. What did you think, Pat?
Yeah, I have to agree. This part three was actually a bit lighter, and there was a lot of character development going on. I do like the sections where Sonia and Rokosinov were developing themselves by simply exchanging conversations with each other, and we get to see this exploration of morality between them even
Mm-hmm.
though there was not a whole lot of things going on, like big major points, I still think that this was a pretty good, not great, but a pretty good part of the story.
Yeah, I think part three really was, like you said, the character development section. Like we see Dunya come into her own here, and like you said, Sonia and Raskolnikov's conversation, and the whole affair between Raskolnikov and Lucian,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was that stranger as well. They really threw a lot of elements into this section to flesh out these characters, and it was nice, this return to story instead of just horror and tragedy and illusion and delusion and
Yeah.
insanity.
Much
And I
more
think
much more
we're and I
dialogue over monologue. You see more relationships developing rather than people just living with their own demons kind of thing.
yeah, and I think we're getting to a point where we're going to see an opening path for Rokosinov eventually in the next part. Like things are beginning to open up. The path is slowly becoming clear. We get to see his own morality and his own choices being brought to life slowly but surely. And it's a good build-up.
Yeah, and I feel like it's showing Raskolnikov making more conscious decisions rather than just reacting to everything around him. Like when he committed crime in part 1, it was just him reacting to his own basic needs and just the immediate future. And now you kind of see him more planning for the future and trying to weasel his way out of the mess that he's made for himself, so he's got to be more conscious about his plan.
One of the parts that I found really interesting was that he published that paper on crime.
Oh yeah.
That was so that entire discussion where he's with, I guess it's a detective or a police officer, right? And they're just talking about this report that he's perpetuated, that supermen exist and should be able to kill people if it's to benefit society. And he's just published this paper like 2 months before he ends up stepping into this own role that he's created.
Yeah. That was a really interesting insight to the way that he thinks, because it's like, yeah, he does believe that there are some people out there that are, above everyone else, but it's unclear whether or not he sees himself in that class, or if he's like struggling to see himself in that class because he feels like he needs to be one of these extraordinary men to get away with what he has gotten away with.
Yeah,
And he's using himself as an example. Like he's putting a piece of himself out there, his own a piece of sacrifice. Or, yeah, essentially he's sacrificing, taking a big risk.
And then he has that nightmare too, where he's trying to like in the latter half of this section, it kind of separates from the lightness, and we go back into him fainting at the mention of murder in front of his sister, and then later on he has this nightmare where he's reliving the act and failing to murder the pawnbroker, and she's laughing at him, and he's weighing whether or not he really was a Superman or if he was just being an idiot, essentially.
Exactly.
And it's funny, right? Because his sister shows up with like her life together. She's got her mom, she's got her fiance, she's got this issue that's happening with her brother and her fiance, and she's tactfully dealing with it and really shouldering a lot of this this crap.
And she seems to be like the one in control of it all too. Like she seems to be the orchestrator.
And it's like, so she's like this traditional male role, and then her brother is this traditional female role who has no idea what's going on and is freaking out and fainting all the time and just acting like this, like a woman, while she is really manning up in the midst of this weird situation.
I almost feel like it's the same dynamic as the other book we're reading with Dagny and Jim.
Yeah. That's a really good comparison. Yeah. And it's funny because like you read either of these books and you say, okay, this book is not a feminist propaganda piece. It's not trying to tout itself as like in favor of females or against men. It's just an interesting circumstance where the woman is doing a much better job of being a man than the men are.
It's just making a point that all these qualities that we generally assign to masculinity doesn't really depend on biological sex that much. Anybody is capable of forging their own path.
It's like the circumstance maketh the person.
I was interested in the dynamic with Razumihin and Dunya, how he just kind of falls in love with her.
That was fun. I enjoyed that bit. That was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Just like shows up drunk and is absolutely head over heels for Dunya, and then wakes up the next morning and like seriously injures his own hand because he's just so pissed off that he's revealed himself to be this base and mean alcoholic silly man.
Yeah.
And then to go over to Dunya's the next morning, and she's just like so pleased that he's there, and her mother thinks of him as a relative because he's really the guiding light through this section. Like they've just shown up in St. Petersburg and they're there to see their brother/son, and he's just completely messed up, and Razumihin almost out of nowhere is like, oh, don't worry, we'll figure it out.
I like how every party involved has a different opinion of that night in question. Just like the mother is just like, oh, what a sweet man doing all this for my lovely son, just such a sweet man. And Dunya's just kind of charmed by him. Oh, what a silly guy, but you got to admit he's pretty great doing all this for us. And little Roja. And then Razumihin himself just wakes up the next day and he's like, oh my god, I made such an ass of myself last night. What am I gonna do about this?
Yeah. So hold on, let me just kind of meta this whole section, because I think what's going on is, for the first time in this read, we've got the most exposure we've had the whole time to humans, and it feels light and it's nice. And what's happening is Razumihin is interacting and doing the best that he can, and at the same time there's a lot less, if none at all, description of the disgusting state of the city they live in. And it's kind of this like optimistic humanitarian thing where the world is a brighter place when people are working together and trying to help each other through it. Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting juxtaposition to the past two sections, where it's really just this isolated world of Rhodia committing murder, and the city's disgusting, and people are killing themselves, and people are getting run over by horse carts, and everything's terrible, and the staircases are bad, and the rooms are small, and then we come into this section, and it's just this family affair, really, and everything's a lot more positive and uplifting briefly when there's more humans involved.
Yeah. And in the first two parts, it's more of a like the characters involved are kind of represented by his anxiety and paranoia.
Yeah.
It's just more him dealing with himself than with other characters. And now that he's coming out of his fever dream, he's starting to interact with reality the way it presents itself, not the way he perceives it.
It's a really great description how he's able to finally come back to his senses.
But you can still kind of tell that the sickness hasn't really left him yet. He's still struggling.
Oh yeah, for sure. But it's like this glimmering promise, like that his spirit still has yet to break, and he hasn't gone past the point of redemption.
And dealing with this whole conflict with Lucian is kind of like a placeholder for dealing with his own kind of problems. Like, instead of being forced to deal with the murder that he committed, now he's kind of distracting himself with, like, oh, I gotta deal with this Peter Petrovich Lucian guy.
Yeah.
If he thinks he's gonna marry my sister, he's got another thing coming.
Which, again, I think is a little absurd in telling of his character. I think there's something a bit more dark and festering underneath the fact that he doesn't want his sister to be with this Lucian character.
Yeah.
I
talked about it in one of the other two videos, but I feel like it's more of a Roja feeling like his future is being decided for him and being completely not in control of anything. Because when he was reading the letter the first time, it was like, okay, so everything in my life is just happening without my approval or without my input at all. It's just happening without me, and I think that's really messing with the guy.
Yeah, but then at the same time, his response is to take away the control and decision from his sister. And she's very much attempting to control and make her own decisions in her life. And he's got no trust in her and doesn't want her to have any say in the matter. And he wants to take away her power because he feels she's taking away his. And it's this bitter paradox. If her sister has free will, then she doesn't, and if he has free will, then she can't do what she wants. And it's just like,
yeah, it's like he's struggling to find his own source of free will, so the only way he can really attain it is to take it from someone else and make someone else's decisions for them instead of, addressing his own concerns.
which is not the first time.
Which is another big test that he's currently facing too. I mean, first he murders the landlady, and now he's sort of going through another situation similar to what happened before, except it's more philosophical, existential.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the first section or second section, however that played out, he takes away the free will and control and power of one woman, two women, by murdering them. And in this section, we see exactly like you said, the philosophical control over a woman's future. Again, maybe he's a misogynist.
Oh, jeez.
Would he have killed the pawnbroker if the pawnbroker was a man? Is that the underlying point here?
Huh. That's a good question.
Is she more despicable because she's a woman pawnbroker?
Well, we have to look at the dialogue between the two characters, the landlady and his sister. What do they have in common? Or any at all?
Well, they're both women, and you keep saying landlady, but I know you mean pawnbroker, right?
Yeah.
They're both women.
I don't know why I get this.
And that's kind of where the similarities end, I feel like. Is there more in common between his sister and the pawnbroker than meets the eye?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do they think the same way philosophically, morally? Or is it completely different? Do they have a different mindset?
I don't think we saw enough dialogue with the pawnbroker to really establish how similar her mindset is to Dunya's. But in the same sentence, I would say, like, they do have that same sort of control over Rhodia, because Raskolnikov is forced to go to this pawnbroker and try and get some money, which is a choice. However much money she wants to give him is completely within her power. And at the same time, his sister and mother are the source of all monetary contributions at this point in Raskolnikov's life. Like, they both represent the land, or the pawnbroker and the sister, this sort of monetary freedom and reprieve that he doesn't have any control over.
Yeah, like both of them are kind of like an authoritarian source. So they both have a form of power over him in whichever form that takes.
It's interesting because he does talk about how busy he is, and then it seems as though he spent a lot of his time lying in bed feeling sorry for himself while simultaneously humoring the belief that he's a great man.
Huh. Sounds a lot like Jim Taggart.
It does, doesn't it? So he's a great man and he deserves everything, and he doesn't do anything in his power to actually control his reality, and so takes out his issue with those women that are in his life that do have power and control. And what happens is not a freedom from these controlling sources, but a complete inner destruction of his own moral code and understanding of the world that he thought he was living in.
It's very egotistical.
Yeah, at a minimum.
So what'd you guys think of Donya's decision to include Rogia in the meeting with Lucian after the letter? Lucian wrote saying that I refuse to meet with your brother again, and if he's there, then I'm not gonna be a part of it.
It was interesting because, like, when you read the letter, it almost felt like he was implying that he was going to take things a bit more seriously than just not hanging out with them, but actually like refusing to marry Dunya. And I think her decision to have her brother show up was like the boldest, most redeeming act that has happened, because she's like, look, this is my brother and you're going to be my husband. So this is only going to work one way, and that's with my brother. And if you think you can tell me what to do with my family, well, you've got another thing coming, and we'll see who you really are when he shows up.
That was the point in the book where I was like, okay, yeah, Dunya's got her shit together. She knows what she wants out of this. Rogia, not so much. She's just kind of reacting to his own emotions.
Yeah, it was a serious power move, and I applaud Dunya.
And then their mother's there just not knowing what to think, but supporting Dunya's decision either way, which I think was the right move. You can kind of tell that she's just getting along in her years.
Yeah.
She just wants everyone to be happy. She just wants the best life for her two kids. And just doesn't know which one to side with, really.
And they talk about how she's still beautiful in her older age too, eh? And the reason that she's beautiful is because she's kept this sort of sincere attitude towards life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only way you can look beautiful in your old age.
Yeah, like just a sense of grace and appreciation for life.
I believe this is where we take a mid-roll break.
All right, yeah. Let's do that. We'll be back in a few. And welcome back.
Doo-doo-doo.
Do-do-do-do-do-do. So about this little Sonia girl, after the death of her father, she comes out to meet Rogia, invites him to the father's funeral, because he was the one that left pretty much all of his money for this poor family to pay for the funeral of the old drunken guy.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, and it talks a lot about, his mental state at the time, and Rogia like fighting with himself and with other people, arguing for the fact that he was out of his mind when he gave the money, and later on he says, no, I was completely conscious of the fact, but, it was still crazy of me to do it. I just don't know why I did it.
And I think that's another prime example of his character, that he thinks he's this great and resourced man that can do whatever he wants and would very much like to help those less fortunate than himself. And as such, he gives all this money to this family, but it's actually just about posturing himself in the eyes of the daughter, because he knows about the daughter. And he's not in a position to be giving that much money. And if he thought about it just 2 steps forward, he'd realize, look, if I give you all this money, the next time you come around, I'm going to have no money. And then you'll realize that I don't have any money. But instead, he's just like, here's all my money. I'm rich. And everybody's like, oh, this guy's rich. Everybody clear the way.
Yeah, and you see that realization in Sonia when she comes inside the door and sees like, hey, your apartment's just as bad as mine. What were you doing giving me all that cash the other day? This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Which is interesting, threefold, because this is now the third woman in Raskolnikov's life where he's trying to control their future, but this time he's doing it in a positive way. For the first time, he's actually trying to make a positive impact on a woman and her future. And what happens, as we'll come to find, is that this woman's going to be his saving grace, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first time he actually does something positive for a woman, it benefits him tenfold. But everything that he's done negative towards a woman has just come back to bite him in the ass.
Yeah. I never really thought about like the whole feminist quality of this book, if that's what you want to call it, before this.
Yeah, I hadn't either. It's just kind of striking me today as we're discussing it.
Yeah. That just goes to show the value of these kind of book club conversations.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking. Wouldn't you agree, Pat?
I was just focusing on just the psychological aspects of it, like personality and morality.
Yeah, and I'd say that that's the same sort of mentality I had going into it. I was kind of like, for the first couple parts, I was like, okay, this is dumb. Don't kill people. But as we got into part 3, it really fleshed out, and it was like, it's a full book with multiple themes, and of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? It's a classic. I don't know why I went into it so ignorantly, expecting not to get any value out of it, but the amount of insight and intrigue I am getting out of it is going to carry me through these next few sections, because this has been a really interesting part.
And also, as someone who's been studying and practicing how to write fiction, it's really hard to break a section of a book into a part where you lay out character development for long periods of time, because sometimes it's really difficult, because you put so much action and dramatic conflict forward first, and then you have to take a break from all that and you explore what the characters are like and everything. It's really difficult unless you know how to do it properly. And in part 3, I think Dostoevsky really puts the ground rules in this one by just exploring not just what the characters are like, but internally we get to see all of that fleshed out smoothly in more ways than none.
Yeah, it is interesting, eh? Like
I like
that
it.
they start off at the climax in traditional book sense, and you're like thrown right into the middle of this hysteria and murder, and then they're like, okay, now stop. We're going to explain to you who all these figures are, and you're not even going to have an issue with it, because I'm good at writing a book, because I'm Dostoevsky. And here we go. Section 3, character development. Not section 1, character development, section 2, build up, section 3, climax. Just completely took the whole template, broke it in half, and flipped it around, and did it flawlessly.
Yeah, he had the climax at the start, and then the rest of the novel is just kind of the aftermath of that climactic moment. And it doesn't feel like it's slow reading or anything like that.
And it's much better than just having these conflicts happen and the one question in the back of your mind that every reader has is like, why? But Dostoevsky is like, hey, chill out, have some vodka. Let me just take you to another section of the story. Let's explore this part of it,
Yeah.
and then we'll get back to the main conflict later.
Yeah, allows for that little vodka break in the middle.
Like, genuinely.
Yeah, and then we have this stranger in the streets when Roji is out for a walk late at night. The stranger's just staring at him, following him, calls him a murderer. He has a nightmare following the stranger and repeating the murder as the old lady laughs and everything.
Hmm.
And then he wakes up screaming, and this guy named Arkady Ivanovich is there ready to introduce himself. Just as a little cliffhanger at the end of the section.
Which is good. Which, like, again, throwing in another human into Rodia's life instead of isolating him some more.
Yeah,
Thank goodness for that.
who do you think this Arkady guy is? What do you think he represents in the story?
I don't know. Where
Yeah,
are
I'm
you?
not sure either.
What are you thinking? You're asking the question, so you must have an opinion. Where do you think they're going with this?
I don't know. Maybe some kind of a Lucifer figure, like the devil. Just the way he introduced himself at the end of the chapter kind of reminded me of that old Rolling Stones song, so please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste.
You're hilarious.
But yeah, they really don't give you a lot, just, hey, here I am. Nice to meet you, Rogia. And the chapter ends.
Yeah.
Well, this is pretty much all that I have to say. I think this is a good section, and I can't wait to get into part 4. I think we're starting to see a bit of a revelation going on, starting to build up, and we'll just see what happens.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Pat. As good as the section was, as enjoyable to read, I don't have too many talking points today.
Mm-hmm. Just really goes through the evolution of Roji's character. I feel like there's an integration of like two different versions of Roja. Just the bloodthirsty killer and the honest guy just trying to do good in the world, who sees himself as an extraordinary man. And they're just two versions of himself kind of reconciling with each other throughout this chapter.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But that process will undoubtedly continue onto the next sections.
Well, we will find out then.
Yeah. But until then, may the force be with you.
Or equal to mass times acceleration.
Yeah, you know.
If you
Your
if
choice.
you want.
Your choice.